Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Resource Gatherer podcast. I'm your host, Justin. With me today is Cody, your co host. We're going to be talking about one of our favorite topics that we sort of dived into a little bit last week, which was Supernatural, the television show. It ended a few years ago, but there's still a lot of diehard fans, including both of us, ironically, that we found out in the last episode that we both secretly like the show without each other's knowledge. So you learn something every day. As always, remember to check out our other content. Dice Age is going to be continuing to make content each and every week. That'll be coming out on Sundays. This will be out on every Friday. And then we'll be having some Magic the Gathering content coming out soon. So be prepared for that as we dive into this week's episode of Resource Gatherer. So, Cody, my first question to you, good sir, is what is Supernatural for all of those who may not know?
Well, Supernatural is a story that started off as just two brothers hunting supernatural things, continuing on their father's legacy for vengeance on a monster that killed their mom when they were just little boys. Now they're in their 20s. They're kind of just like reuniting after they had a big separation. And then it continues on. And then it's the classic, like, almost like D&D campaign where you start off with the little stuff, then you're going on to the bigger and badder monsters, and eventually they're fighting demons and kings of hell and Leviathan and just like the crazy high-end level monsters like in the D&D monster manual.
Absolutely. And for all of those who are visually watching us on our YouTube channel, and if you aren't, you can check us out on our YouTube at Resources the Gathering. You're going to see one of the two cats that live here. This is Bagheera. She is the all-black one. If you see the black and white one, that is Salem. She's super sweet, and she likes this couch, so she is now a guest star on the show. So, Bagheera, welcome to the show. So essentially, Cody hit it right, nail on the head. Supernatural, the other cool thing that it's really, it has a lot of inspiration from old classic stuff, including Scooby-Doo. So they make a lot of Scooby-Doo references, and then they actually did a crossover with Scooby-Doo because of that sort of level of style of each episode sort of follows that formulaic style in which the episode starts off with a new monster. We don't know what it is. The brothers got to go figure out what it is. They think they know what it is. They're wrong. And then they finally figure out what it is, and then they save the day. And that's pretty much like the episodic way. And then it goes into like sort of delving into these larger form storytellings that eventually sort of break the mold, as Cody was sort of describing.
And it's not like super progressive. Like there's a lot of filler episodes where you can kind of like jump in and watch at any time.
Yeah.
And that's the nice part. Like there is a sequence because I'm a big sequence person. Like this has to happen for this, this, and this. But there's also those nice like fluff pieces where it's like, okay, like cool. They didn't do anything with the main storyline in this one, but it was still entertaining.
Yeah, and I think that that's really what's interesting about a lot of American television whenever you compare it to other mediums. But I will say filler episodes are a thing even in Japanese anime. So
Oh yeah.
I think every medium has it. But I think the reason why it's so good is because it's just a great casual show to watch.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I have to spend a lot of time like paying attention to the overall arcing plot of like, oh, hey, this was a really crucial detail that I missed. Now, you might miss an episode or two that were crucial to the big plot. So, continuing on through the seasons, like Cody said, does matter. But what's nice is it does feel very like D&D style-ish in the idea that like whenever you're doing these stories, every session should be an enclosed story. And then from there, it should have a big overarching storyline. And that's really how I approach Dungeons & Dragons. I treat it like episodes in a television or chapters in a book.
No, 100%. I mean, that's like the most important part of it is just making sure like there are some characters that come in for like a special guest, like Garth.
Yeah.
Like wasn't super important in the beginning, kind of was important at the end. Like he helped out with different things, but it was like he's a side character. Like they even talk about how Garth is the side character. He was like, I don't want to be a main character. He's like, your guy's life sucks as a main character.
Yeah.
He's like, but I'm a side character. I'm cool with that. He's like, I'm married. I'm happy. Like.
Well, and then you look at like what is it? Like a lot of guest stars, like characters they didn't think were gonna make it, like Costello,
Castilla. Or oh my gosh, Castiel.
Yeah,
Oh.
Castiel. Sorry, yeah, I was like, nope, that wasn't it. Castiel, the one of the characters from the show. Spoiler alert. he was originally created as like a one-time offshoot that they were supposed to have in the show, but then they really liked having him in the show, and so they just kept bringing him back, and he ended up becoming one of the main characters all the way up until the very end of the show.
Yeah.
I think like Bobby was another character that was kind of like an offshoot.
Yeah, he was on the end of the first season, and everyone was just like, "This dude's awesome."
Yeah, I really like the fact that they're like, because they're both basically had daddy issues.
Yeah.
It kind of
abandoned him, and
Yeah.
Bobby filled in as a pseudo dad.
Yeah, he was basically like the stepdad that stepped in. That is what stepdads do, by the way.
Yeah.
For all you stepdads, we appreciate you. We appreciate you, Cody.
Thanks, man.
He's not my stepdad though. Don't worry, guys. He's not that old.
Thanks.
But I'm just kidding. I'm not, like Cody and I are only like 4 years apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ironically.
Yeah, I know. So when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons and Supernatural, I think what would be a really cool idea is that obviously I like to homebrew, you like to homebrew. What if we concocted a homebrew session for Supernatural here on the podcast and talked about how we would incorporate those rules, laws, and gimmicks that Supernatural has in order to create that sort of same flavor?
I mean, it'd definitely be possible. The hardest constraints would be, obviously, like, you got to pick a time frame, like, because as we've noticed, like, when you do homebrews and stuff like that, like, the more modern you get, the more difficult it gets.
Yes. So if we were to go into a more modern setting of Supernatural, I think we'd have to move further and further away from the actual Dungeons and Dragons mechanics. But if we were to stay in, say, a classic D&D adventure, the first thing you have to realize is what classes the cast members are, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So we have, obviously, Sam's the easiest. He's a warlock. They literally sort of give off that implication. His power is borrowed from a demon, give it to him at birth, blood. Super easy. You play your warlock.
And researches out the wazoo on
Yeah.
every aspect known to man.
So what's interesting is that means that for Sam's character, if you were to play Sam inside of a campaign, you would need to have a background in investigation.
Yep.
So like they have like detective is like one of the main backgrounds. So that way you can ensure that you have the natural skills in investigation while keeping that natural charisma that you need for your class to roll, but also because Sam is very likable. He's a very nice dude who, up until like, the mid-tier seasons, is also very against like using his demonic powers.
Yeah.
So how do you play into that? You have to play into the idea that like, well, maybe I'm not, super strong. Maybe I'm relying more heavily on my combat skills that like a warlock would originally do.
Yeah. Before they start diving into more of their pact and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but always cast Eldritch Blast.
Yeah.
So then we go into Dean. I think Dean's a little bit more of a harder take. I think in the early seasons, he's probably just a fighter.
Yeah.
But as the seasons progress, I would say that he starts delving into Paladin a lot more.
Yeah, like he kind of has like his own like creed, like his like own oath that he's gonna. I mean, even in the beginning, like I would say he's more of a paladin that takes on more fighter aspects towards the end because like he always keeps that fundamental core values.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, his family comes first. He does everything for his brother or for his dad or whoever it was. Like he always. Like he was a soldier in training like his entire life. Like his dad raised him to be like a warrior.
Yeah, absolutely. And he is a warrior fighting evil. So Paladin does make sense. But the reason why I think fighter into Paladin eventually makes sense is because a lot of the early character progression for Dean kind of like while his pact and sort of ordeal sort of comes along, it's not really until after he sort of dies that he really starts diving into like his true pact. And then obviously he becomes the vessel for his god, which I think if you were to implement that element into Dungeons and Dragons, how you could do it is you start off your characters at level 1, and each of them would have a either demonic or angelic being that's possessing their body.
Yeah. I mean, you could almost treat it like the seasons as your levels.
Exactly.
Because like as the seasons progress, like because originally the show was supposed to end at season 5.
Yep, that was when Kripke actually left the show. If you don't know, Kripke is the guy who does The Boys now, and it's actually why Jensen Ackles is back on The Boys. It's great watching those two masterminds work back together, and I think they're actually talking about bringing in the actor who plays Sam into it as well. So really looking forward to that in The Boys. But Diving back into Crypt Keys. Yeah, so essentially with it ending after season 5, and that's really where I think, for me, that's where I stop watching when I do rewatches. I can't watch past season 5 because the show loses a lot of what it was building. Like the whole story arc of, like the green-eyed or the yellow-eyed man, and then it sort of goes into Lilith, and then after Lilith, you start seeing like it really starts devolving into like a kind of more of a wonkier show.
Yeah, it definitely takes a few twists and turns, but that's the other part that I like. I mean, there are seasons I didn't care for the Leviathan season that much. Like that one was kind of like we're kind of going a little way too left field here. But then like when like seasons like 11 and 12 came back and they were really good because another side character that got a big starring spotlight was the sheriff Jody Mills.
Yes.
And she was awesome.
Yes.
Because originally she was just kind of like here and there a little bit, but then it turned into like she became like their pseudo mom.
Yeah.
And they like had great conversations. They had great adventures, different things like that. And then like a couple other characters that were there, then they come back because like if you die in Supernatural, odds are you're going to come back. It's not a permanent thing in that show.
And see, that's actually why I think if you were to do it as a traditional Dungeons and Dragons campaign, so there's a couple elements that you have to get right? First thing you have to get right is you need to have a car. And it doesn't need to be a car, but it needs to be the car. You know what I'm saying? So, like, you need a vessel that's going to be able to get you around from place to place to place as you do a sort of island hopper style campaign. But rather than doing islands, you're going from town to town to town on a continent or country.
Yeah.
Because that's really what it is. It's just they hop from city to city to city, driving around, looking for problems, solving issues, and then eventually those problems lead to, like, big threats, right? So, like, as a DM, how I would sort of incorporate that is I would start off small. Maybe it's their hometown of these heroes. They start off with their demonic pack, their angelic pack.
Yeah.
So you have your warlock, your paladin. Maybe you have a cleric. Maybe you have a couple other side characters who really are just like, I don't want to be the protagonist, but I want to be like the cool side character, like you said.
Yeah.
Because I want to have like a good life.
Well, because that's like my favorite character on that show either would be Bobby.
Yes.
Because Bobby was like, he's a wizard.
Yeah.
Researches, knows everything, not the strongest fighter.
But he also has an arcane sigil, like inside of his spare room that he just has so he can lock away demons. So he has high level banishing spells. Just
oh yeah,
yeah.
And he knows all the spells like by heart and everything like that. And that to me that is like a wizard all day. And then my other favorite character who was a antagonist and became a protagonist was Crowley.
Yeah, so I liked Crowley. I think what's interesting too, like, so I think my favorite is from like the earlier seasons. She was the demon who like Sam sleeps with.
Oh, Meg? Ruby.
Ruby, yes. So with Ruby, which was really cool, is Ruby was a rogue.
Yeah.
100%. She's your classic rogue. She stabs people in the back. She gives you information. She's not afraid to wheel and deal.
She looks out for number one.
Yeah,
she classic rogue plays.
Exactly. She plays your classic rogue. But what was cool is all these characters, because obviously like the warlock and the rogue go on side adventures, while the paladin's off sleeping. And the paladin's not going to agree with those decisions that the warlock is doing because it's like, hey, Dean.
Yeah.
Or it'd be like, hey, Sammy, you shouldn't be going into that dark world. And then we'd be like, no, I'm doing it for a just cause. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, okay, cool. But regardless, sorry for that terrible impressions for our audience now. But regardless, I think what's interesting though, right, is the more and more you play Dungeons and Dragons and the more and more you look at other content, you can see the correlations between the two. So I think the main thing that you have to realize with every single Dungeons and Dragons session is that it is like the offshoot like we originally discussed. So how I prep for sessions is turn it into a mini adventure. So if every single session you do a 3 to 4 hour session or even 2 hour sessions like I generally do for a lot of my friends, within that 2 hours you want to have an arc, a story arc. There are natural story arcs that happen through the 8 cycles of a story. You can look those up. It's really interesting stuff for how like people actually tell stories and how they interact with those things. But essentially, you need to start off with your call to adventure. So something happens. So if you're riding around in your chariot or your wagon because you can't afford anything else because you're a level 1 adventurer, eventually you have an artificer on your group who decides to like mod it up, get it cool. They're the one who actually drives the car, and your paladin just kind of sits there and is like, I steer, but I don't drive.
Yeah.
But regardless, like maybe that's how you played in your D&D campaign. As you're progressing into your story, you go, okay, cool. So then who are your bads, right? So for a story like this, I think demons are the obvious choice, especially in the beginning, but demons also tend to be higher level threats. So what do you do to mitigate that you can sort of implement some of the early level or your early season supernatural villains that you can implement as sort of replacements for these higher level demons?
So, I mean, you can always go with humans that are like worshippers or followers, because those are easy, like to put like, you know, sub a bandit for like, just call them
Cultists.
something. Yeah, cultists. Like
Yeah.
call them something different
So
or even like
cultists are like run of the mill basic boy human bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think cultists. So then maybe your first mission, if you're running out of like running this as a campaign, would be trying to a ritual's happening. Cultists try to murder somebody to complete their ritual. Maybe they don't succeed. Maybe they do. You don't know. And then that crucial moment, the heroes either step in and they save them, or if you really want to be a sadistic person to show your players consequence, they arrive just before or just after the ritual's been cast, and they failed. And it's to show the implications of what your role could be, and then why it's important to be successful and why being a hero matters. Because the moment that happens, boom, maybe that unlocks Pandora's box, and that's where the spiraling of different events occur. We've talked about it on a previous episode about like, there's always gonna be that high level bad, but your adventurers are gonna start off by fighting like maybe the 3 orcs who are like terrorizing the small town in front of them, putting out the house fire or something.
Or even like in the classic Waterdeep campaign, like you go to the house and there's like a specter in there.
Exactly, yeah.
Specters aren't exactly high level, but they do take a little bit of finesse and special like attacks to be able to kill it.
Yeah.
So then that's like another thing, like a very supernatural-esque. Like,
Absolutely.
you have to have like, this particular weapon soaked in this particular fluid, or done at this certain time. Like, like what was it like in the show, the Kill a Djinn? You have to have a silver dagger dipped in lamb's blood.
Yeah.
Like, how random is that?
But see, and that's where like I think like for my off-camera campaign, I do that a lot. I actually got a lot of inspiration from this, but also like Castlevania and a lot of other inspirations. I'm doing the War for the Vanguard. If anybody's seen it on our channel, I'm doing that campaign, but offline with a bunch of friends. But essentially, the idea is that their goal is they get a mission, and the mission is solve a mystery, right? So you started off by doing a classic murder mystery whodunit sort of style campaign. They started off their campaign with the mystery of a bunch of cultists known as the Water Worshippers.
Okay.
And the Water Worshippers, their goal was to essentially like summon Cthulhu and like bring damnation into, like bring that level of power into the world so that way they can then use that power to rise through the ranks of this city, which is now ran over by like different subsections of monsters that are all like fighting for their different power levels within the city.
Yeah.
The overarching villain is vampires, but you could even swap that with, say, like demons for this style campaign for,
But I mean, even with supernatural, like, there are vampires is probably the most reoccurring monster in the entire show.
Yeah, and
I mean, compare like other than demons, it is, I believe, vampires. You get a handful of werewolves, but that's not till like even like later seasons mostly.
Yeah, and I think like one of their like early season sort of main big bads was the vampire hunter who turned vampire.
Yeah.
That
Gordon.
Yeah. So Gordon was like one of the probably the best villains because he just took on that embodiment so well, where we literally as the audience saw him become the villain. So you could even do that in your D&D campaign. So let's say you have all of your characters, rather than having the warlock and paladin intro like your Sam and Dean, maybe you just have a Sam, or maybe you just have a Dean, and maybe the other character is this character that's in your world. You have to watch them and their party, or they're the antagonist to your protagonist sort of style. Or maybe in your campaign, if you really want to flip it on its head, you're the villain. So you're a low-level villain in your campaign, and you have to deal with Sam and Dean
constantly coming after you.
Yes, and so you have to create minions and monsters and send them out to cause chaos to distract them while you're doing your evil deeds.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be pretty good. Because, I mean, like, that's essentially what Crowley did for a long time. He just kind of...
So, yeah, so with that idea, essentially, of playing as the villain and creating that villain arc, like you said, with Crowley, how would you create a villain-style campaign where you're like a low-level boss?
So, like, a villain-style one... I would definitely, like, you would set it up to where you just have different, like, you have to have a task, you know, and even if you're the villain, you would have to have some type of, you know, god or patron or something like that.
Yeah, you'd have to have a boss
that you are working for, and he's like, hey, you need to do this, you know, he'll give you some resources, you know, but he's not going to give you, you know...
his top-notch gear. Yeah, he's going to start you off with, like, the basic stuff and prove your loyalty to eventually, like, get up there. And then, you know, you're eventually going to reach the point where, well, my boss is really strong, but I've been secretly hiding away power to overthrow my boss.
Essentially what Crowley did. You know,
Crowley did to Lilith, yeah.
He was a demon soul dealer that became King of the Crossroads, that eventually became King of Hell.
Yeah.
You know, and then the big bad came back and kind of wiped the floor with him. Then he ended up, you know, having to join up with Sam and Dean to come back and take over so he could become the king again.
So yeah, I mean, that's really like one of the ways that you could approach it if you wanted to go from an evil approach. You have your heroes who are hunting down your villain esque sort of characters that they'll be playing, and then from there, you know, eventually they'll have to team up to take down the bigger bad.
But even like in the classic Supernatural campaign, you can have it start off, you know, the brothers working together, and then they split where they actually end up combating each other.
Yeah.
To get the other one to come back to their side, and then ironically, the next season or two, the other one leaves, and it's just like a constant like rotation of like
who's alive, who's dead, and whose side are you on?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that could work too. I think if I were to really do this, I think I'd choose one of the brothers. I think I'd probably choose Dean. And the reason why is because I think Dean's story makes the most sense to have as like your leader / boss that you're working for, because his ideals are true.
Yeah.
Like his goal is very simple. It's slaughter monsters and then save his family. And he doesn't care about anything else besides eating cheeseburgers and like, you know, his weird offshoots. But I think Dean makes more sense as like a basic boss, right? And then eventually, you know, he wants you to find his brother. Maybe that's the overarching goal, is to find the brother.
Yeah.
And then from there, once you find Sam joins you guys. And then from there, you're like, okay, well, so now Sam's a part of our team. It's great. We have like an extra ally. They're both kicking butt, doing the things that they want to do. Well, then suddenly Sam, you know, does the Sam thing, and he starts sneaking away, and eventually he becomes the mid-level big bad that you then have to take down. But because you don't want to kill him because Dean's your boss, you have to take him down a different way. And that's where you could put in like your Bobby-style character of banishings, trying to find a way to like
exorcisms, different things like that, you know, to save him, like to do a non-lethal win.
Exactly. And that's what I think is really interesting too, because a lot of people, whenever we play these games, right, like D&D, even if you're playing like Baldur's Gate, if you're playing it at home, like some of us are, the main thing is a lot of people think that when they get into a conflict, they have to kill the guy, right? Oftentimes, you don't. I don't think killing really makes sense if you're the hero to always slay things. You're like, oh, well, I'd slay the monster. Why? If the monster gives up, truly gives up, isn't, you know, you can't, as the hero, you have to be like, okay, I'm going to not murder you here. Or maybe, and this is kind of, you know, something that's interesting too, maybe you use the monster to get what you need.
You know, everything you just said contradicts you playing a Dean.
Oh, absolutely. Which is why I was saying I think Dean actually made the most sense, because as Dean slays everything.
Yeah, and Sam always wants to find the other alternative if the person isn't that bad. Like the one vampire, he didn't want to kill her because she was a vegan vampire that only ate like cow's blood and not human blood.
But that's the reason why I think playing with Dean as your boss makes the most sense, because then you as players have to play Sam.
Yeah.
Because Sam is a lot harder of a character to play than I think Dean is, because Dean is very straightforward.
Well, and it's because their overall goals and morals are so different. Because like Dean had a family that got taken away from him, you know, and he just wants to kill everything that could possibly ever hurt it because he's so protective of what little he has left. But Sam never really had one.
Yeah.
You know, dad was gone in drunken adventures. His mom died when he was only like 6 months old. You know, so he never had one. So like in the show, Dean has to find him off at college because Sam ran away like years ago.
Yeah, and I think that that's what makes Supernatural such a great show, is that the character dynamics, while the show progresses and changes, and their characters do develop over time, they hold those core values that make them those characters. And that's really what plays really nicely into Dungeons and Dragons. Whenever you design your character should have a goal, a motto, and a lifestyle of how they approach every problem. And as your character progresses through these different levels, different adventures, they're going to change.
Yeah, just like you as a regular person, you know, like you are not the same person you were 5 years ago.
Absolutely. But as you change, you also stay the same. And that's where we're going to end tonight's spooky episode with that morally conflicting answer.
Brain teaser.
Yeah. We'll see you guys next week. Happy Halloween.